5 Lincoln 103, 5 Lincoln 102, Lincoln 103 and 102.
Responding to 401 parking structure, section 1 boy.
Henry 8, Henry 9. Respond to gate 437 Bravo for your dignitary detail. 3K 911 unattended, 400 lower level near carousel 4, black bag. GTA in progress, 401 parking structure, section 4 boy.
Responding to 401 parking structure, section 1 boy.
415 passenger onboard aircraft.
Control 2 Franklin en route.
484 suspect is female, Hispanic, 28 years of age, blue jeans, no further.
Control 5 Frank 401 is en route.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of On the Legal Side. I'm your host, Rick McCann. We're so glad that you have joined us for this edition. Every other week or so, we have an edition of On the Legal Side where we discuss the legal issues facing the private security and private police industry today. And it's not a radio show about pointing the fingers or implying that anyone is better than anyone else or doing more wrong. A lot of times when we do shows that show a negative side of private security, we get some emails from our listeners who say, yeah, but the cops do worse. Look, all the cops. Yeah, we understand that. I really do. But this show is a kind of informative, and it's really a show about what's going on and how we could maybe prevent it from happening to our own company, our own employees, and today is going to be one of those shows, unfortunately, where we talk about some of the negatives happening today in the world of private security. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to sit back and just say, oh, it's just one or two, it's not a big deal, because it is a big deal. Today, here on the legal side, we're talking about a question that a lot of people are asking these days as more and more security officers get arrested on the job, on duty. We're not talking about somebody who's off-duty, civilian clothes, and they get arrested for, smoking some weed or driving drunk or slapping their girlfriend. We're talking about what's happening while security officers are actually on the job, on duty. And a lot of people have been asking lately, with all of these arrests happening in the private security business, they're asking, is the security company responsible when their employee commits violent crimes or any crime on duty, when they're on the clock? Now, we've got the long and short answer for you, but we want to discuss a couple of cases that have come up recently and use them as examples. But I want to set this up a little bit more before I go into those recent cases and before we talk about company liability and mitigating circumstances and all that other legal jargon that's very important to know and understand, but unfortunately many do not. And they're in the business, but they just don't have a clue as to what their liability is, even though they might say they do or think they do. But before I go there, before I head to that direction, we want to talk a little bit about 2016. 2016, more than 2,200 security officers were arrested for committing crimes on duty. And these are crimes on duty that were notable for the press to pick up or for law enforcement to issue a press release. These are not crimes such as disorderly conduct or petty theft or something minute and minimal that doesn't get picked up usually by the press. These are crimes that were severe and serious and egregious enough for local press to pick up and to put out in their media. Some of these were carried by national media platforms such as CNN, Fox News, the Associated Press, Politico, and others. And then other cases and arrests were actually part of press releases that we received from dozens and dozens of law enforcement agencies. And we also get a news update from a number of media platforms every single day, 7 days a week. So we get to see the arrest. We get to see the good, the bad, and as I often say, the evil of our industry. It's not all bad. Please don't think I'm, putting security down. I've been in this business all my life. Security officers as a whole do a great job. And I want to say this too. Maybe this will help enlighten you. There are over 2 million, depending on who you listen to and what facts you believe, there are over 2 million security officers in the U.S. today, and that includes loss prevention agents, proprietary agents, school security personnel, contract security, and those who work event security and others who are unregulated, bouncers, people like that. With 2,200 arrests for semi-serious crimes, that isn't 10% of the workforce. That isn't 5% of the workforce. It's barely 1% of the workforce. So looking at the numbers, 2 million employed in security and only 2,200 serious arrests, well, when you look at it that way, 1% of the overall workforce arrested, well, that doesn't look so bad. If we're talking 10, 15, 30%, 50%, oh my gosh, yeah, now we've got a huge problem. But we are still talking about 2,200, and of those 2,200 arrests in 2016, 137 was for murder or homicide, which is the same thing. There are various degrees of homicide. Some states, they have first and second degree murder. They have reckless homicide. They have manslaughter. Other states, they have other charges that are related to homicide. So 137 were actually charged in an excessive force situation. There were 41, at least 41, that we were able to pick up on that were arrested for rape in 2016. 41 is still a high number overall. There were many other security officers arrested for violent and heinous crimes, including burglary, kidnapping, felony theft, embezzlement, and other crimes during their duty hours. Many, many crimes were extremely egregious because they were security officers on the property supposed to be, protecting life and property, not being the criminal and victimizing the client. Many of the crimes were of the theft nature, but many others were burglary and kidnapping, assault with a weapon, theft. We even had several security officers who shot each other. One or two committed murders of other security officers on duty. And we've seen this in previous years as well, but last year there were several of them, including one at a casino. There's really a gross lack of supervision in the private security industry, whether you're talking about proprietary or contract. And I can remember working a proprietary job many years ago where my supervisor was stealing things and setting up other employees for the thefts, and I had to go to the general manager. I had to go to my supervisor and spill the beans, let them know what was happening. There is a gross lack of supervision specifically in the contract security industry because many times security officers on duty, they get minimal background checks and sometimes no drug screens, no other source of reference checks, very limited, and there's not a lot done in the training arena, as we know. Sometimes it's just a few minutes of OJT, on the job training, and really, in truth, more than a third of security officers who are put on a post or a job site of any type are seldom spot checked. They're seldom visited by either a field supervisor or management person, and most of the time they have no contact with their employer unless there's a problem with either a complaint that came in from the client or a customer, or there's a problem with the payroll check, and then there's going to be contact. But other than that, there's a real lack of supervision in the field, and I think that if you work in private security, if you work in management, if you own a security company, and you want to be honest, you could probably agree to the statement, because I've seen it forever, from the beginning of my career, even until today. This week in Virginia is a prime example of how a contract vendor, a security company, places security staff on a job site, on a post, and they forget about them. Many management and security companies believe that if they don't get a call from the client, no news is good news. Everything must be running smooth. There must not be a problem. Everything is A-okay. As long as the client's not burning up and ringing up my phone, as long as the client's not calling me every 3 minutes with complaints, as long as the security officer, doesn't do a no-show, we got a body on the job site, everything is good. No. And this past week, a high school security officer in Newport News was given a life sentence in prison for gang murder, recruiting gang members in the high school where he was a security officer, and running a marijuana distribution enterprise in the high school, recruiting high school students to sell for him, and then going out with a couple of high school kids and killing an opposing gang member. The employer had no idea, no concept, no clue that this has been going on. This isn't something that happened for one day. It didn't happen just overnight. It wasn't something that just in the last 3 or 4 days he was able to put together a network of drug sellers and murderers. No, this had been going on for quite some time. And we're going to look at this case and one other example that we want to talk about in this episode, and that is an example of another contract security person in Boston, Massachusetts last year who killed 2 doctors while on duty. Again, a lack of supervision, a lack of communication with the employee, a lack of overwatch, if you will, of our own people. Sometimes you can give too much leeway to your children. Even though they're good kids, you can let them stay out until midnight and run the streets, and before you know it, they might be in trouble with drugs or the cops. And it's the same thing with employees. Good employees can often be tempted because they have nobody double checking them. There's no checks and balances in place. We're just assuming everything is running smooth. And unfortunately, in the contract security world, the contract maintenance world, the contract business as a whole, once we put an employee on the job site, really all that we're concerned about at that point is that they're showing up and hopefully doing their job, doing their duties, and we're able to invoice those hours, because that's how a business is built in the contract world. It's all built on contract hours. If you can have a monthly billable of 20,000 hours, you're going to make some profit. You're going to have a growing company. So unfortunately, sometimes we look beyond true supervision and are just happy to have somebody on the post, on the job site, so that we can bill the client those hours. When we come back from this break, we're going to talk about these two examples, the high school security officer in Newport News and the security officer in Boston, Massachusetts, who killed 2 doctors while on duty. And they're not the only people. They're not the only security officers arrested for this type of heinous, violent crimes. It happens over and over and over again. In fact, just this past week, a security officer arrested for multiple murders while he was on duty. We'll be right back after this break. Don't go away.
Well, no pigtails anymore.
Check, please.
David, you okay to drive?
Yeah, I only had a couple drinks. I'm fine.
Come on.
Keys can be a weapon. A few drinks can make you a killer.
In Boston, Massachusetts, Bampuman Tahira, a 30-year-old security officer, was arrested last year accused of murdering 2 doctors in their exclusive condominium. Dr. Richard Field and Dr. Lena Bolaños were killed by this security officer during what police are calling a home invasion. Police still have not said if he had any prior contacts with these doctors. They don't know, or they're not saying if he had been stalking them, scoped them out, or how he had picked his victims. In this very exclusive building, security personnel acted also as concierge, often bringing packages and other items to residents' doors and doing other concierge-type services. So it is possible that he had stalked them, that he knew or thought he knew that they had a lot of money, or whatever it was that the security officer was trying to take from these 2 doctors. The management company and the security company confirmed in 2016 that this security officer may have access to the doctor's homes previously. Really not a lot of information as to why or how he picked his victims, except to say that the doctors lived in a penthouse and from all outward appearances was quite wealthy, and that may have been the reason why they were targeted. But in this situation, the contractor, the security agency, never ever had any insight as to the potential violence of their employee. They never had any insight as to any wrongdoings on the job because they didn't do a lot of background check. In Massachusetts, unarmed security personnel don't go through a big to-do to be licensed. And it may have been a situation where the employer just didn't bother following up on this employee's background. It's very concerning when you have a security officer who takes advantage of the client's staff, their customers. I don't know how many times in the last 15 years that we have seen headlines where security officers have robbed their own client. It's one thing to steal, it's another thing to commit such heinous crimes as murder, robbery, home invasion. Is the security company liable? Do they themselves, is there any possibility that they themselves could be held in any way, shape, or form culpable when a security officer goes completely berserk and commits such heinous and violent crimes? Next week, we're going to address that question. We're going to talk about what the real definition, and believe me when I tell you, liability, many people, they have a very black and white definition of liability, but it really extends far beyond your little dictionary, Webster Dictionary version of liability, because in today's world, in today's court, juries and even judges are often completely against a company when it involves such heinous crimes committed by their employees who weren't supervised. In fact, just in a recent case, an employee of a security company who crashed into a vehicle and killed the driver, that company is liable for $17 million. The employee was found guilty and sent to prison. And if they had a little bit more information to show where the company knew that the employee's driver's license was suspended, that company could be on the hook for criminal charges too. So next week, we'll talk about culpability. We'll talk about liability. We'll talk about criminal charges being put against the company if there's any evidence whatsoever that the company was complicit, that they knew ahead of time. In the murder in Boston, that's just an example of what happens. I said a moment ago that a high school security officer in Newport News just last week was found guilty and sent to prison. He worked at a high school for a contract company. Michael Hobson, 40 years old now, sent to prison because he had recruited kids from the high school to sell his marijuana. He had developed a huge marijuana distribution system, an organized crime syndicate. He also arranged for a gang member to be killed by minors that he recruited at the high school. In fact, not just one, but he ordered at least 3 other hits, 2 of them resulting in people being critically wounded, according to the district attorney's office. During the trial, Hobson was charged with racketeering, murder in aid of racketeering, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder in aid of racketeering, and a marijuana distribution charge. Under federal guideline, he not only faces life in prison, he now faces 2 life terms in prison. Where did all of this happen? Where was all of this being done? Was it in his home? Was it in the parking lot of 7-Eleven? Was it someplace beyond the reach of his employer? No. This was all happening at the high school, at the job site, at the location that the employer was fully responsible for. It was up to them to supervise their employee. What happens a lot of times, folks, let's be honest, a contract company, whether it's maintenance or security, whatever it might be, they put their employer on the property and they go, oh, goody, we can wash our hands of that employee because the client's going to supervise them. The client's going to take care of him. They're going to watch out to make sure that he's doing his job, and they'll let us know if something goes wrong. We don't have to worry anymore. We don't have to do any spot checks. We don't have to have any checks and balances in place. We don't have to worry about it. We'll just bill that account and be done with it. That's not the way it works. As an employer, we are responsible for our employee, whether they be working on a contract or working at our own office. We are 1,000% responsible for their actions. We are 1,000% responsible for what they do right or wrong. We can take the accolades when they're doing a great job. Hey, we're so happy. Yeah, it's all us. We're doing a great job supervising. But when they're doing wrong things, when they're doing illegal things, when they're doing bad things, when they are committing crimes, then we have to step up to the plate at that point too, and we have to become responsible and liable and say, look, something's wrong, something happened, I apologize, let's get this corrected. Let's take the necessary correction actions to get this taken care of, whether that be terminate them, call the police and have them arrested, whatever it takes. Let's rectify it. Too many times, contract companies want to give away their responsibility for supervising their staff, and we can't. We can't give away those responsibilities or liabilities. I applaud the many companies out there who actively supervise their employees. They still employ patrol supervisors who spot check the accounts. They still employ patrol supervisors and shift supervisors who monitor their paperwork, who check reports, who even check camera systems. And yes, there are even security companies and employers who conduct surveillance on their employees, as I have done. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not that we don't trust the employee, it's that we have to have checks and balances in place. If we suspect that the employee is having parties on the job site, stealing from the employer, from the client, or doing some other illegal activity, then it is up to us, not the client, to find out, to investigate, and to take corrective actions. That's up to us. Can employers be held liable? Can they be held criminally liable for the actions of security officers? The answer is yes and no. The long and short of it, it really depends about the situation. Next week, we're going to talk about, in the next episode of On the Legal Side, we're going to talk about how employers have been arrested and how many courts have held the employer liable and culpable in major civil lawsuits. You're not going to want to miss the next episode of On the Legal Side. And if you're listening now, don't be late to the party. Don't be late to the radio show tomorrow, Monday, as we are on our regular program, weekly Private Officer Beat, Monday, tomorrow morning. We're going to be wrapping up part 2 of how domestic violence situations can and do turn into active killer situations. Don't miss that program. Want to thank everybody for listening to On the Legal Side, where we talk about all of the legal matters, what really happens in the security industry, the good and the bad and the ugly. Join me next time for the wrap-up of this program. Until then, be safe, be blessed, and we'll see you right back here on the radio.